Welcome! CPA Planet lessons help you get more points on your CPA exam. These lessons provide clear explanations from the student's perspective, visual learning, and we even try to make it interesting and entertaining. Enjoy the lessons and pass the CPA exam. Welcome to the lesson on ethics, professional responsibilities, and federal tax regulation. This is a long section. It's a couple lessons together, and if you follow along, you can see in the header it's all described very clearly what section we're in. So wherever you are, you can see where you are. We are starting with ethics and responsibilities in tax practice, regulations governing practice before the IRS, tax practitioners. We're following the same structure that the AICPA uses when they divide up this lesson, the ethics area. And so we're going to just step through each of those areas. We provide an overview of what they are, the subsections, and starting with this section. So, starting with the tax practitioner section, the first thing we talk about is Circular 230. Circular 230 covers the rules of practice for this area. It's the code that covers everything which we talk about in this section. Here are the subparts of Circular 230 when we go through all of these one by one. Subpart A, rules governing authority to practice. B, duties and restrictions in practice before the IRS. C, sanctions for violating the regulations. D, rules applicable to disciplinary proceedings. E, general provisions. So, just an overview of this entire lesson, ethics and professional responsibilities. This is all about, it's not just about ethics, it's much more than that. It's basically the system of laws and enforcement governing the society of CPAs. So if you think of the CPAs as their own separate country, these are the laws governing that country. And so we discuss the major laws, and then we discuss what happens if you break the laws. What's the penalties? What's the punishments for them? And those penalties can translate into actual penalties in our real world, obviously. There are criminal penalties and also civil. Okay, so talking about tax practitioners and tax preparers, these are two distinct areas, and you need to be clear on the difference. Tax practitioners covers people who practice before the IRS. Tax preparers do not need to be a CPA. It's you have less requirements and qualifications needed to be a tax preparer. So you can work for H&R Block. That's a classic example. You do not need to be a CPA to do that. So we'll talk about the definition of each of these and the circumstances of each of these two categories. They're both covered by Circular 230. So first we're going to start, as we said, as you can see in the header, we're starting with tax practitioner. Overview of practice before the IRS. Practice before the IRS can be defined as a presentation of the IRS related to a taxpayer, related to IRS laws or regulations. These presentations include the following list: correspondence with the IRS, meeting with IRS representatives on behalf of a taxpayer, representing a client, rendering written advice on behalf of a client, preparing documents on behalf of a client, filing documents. All of these things are the ways that you can practice before the IRS. Make a note, a power of attorney is required for all of these areas. Okay. Now, for a tax practitioner, standards of conduct. The government may censure, fine, suspend, or disbar tax advisors if they violate Circular 230 standards of conduct. A tax practitioner must advise a client of any noncompliance, must exercise due diligence in representations, must charge only reasonable fees. That's an interesting one. Some gray area there, but you've got to be reasonable in your fees. Send any requested records to the IRS. CPAs are also subject to the AICPA Code of Professional Conduct and the AICPA Statements on Standards for Tax Services. So those are standards of conduct for tax practitioners. Who may practice before the IRS? Attorneys, CPAs, enrolled agents, enrolled actuaries with a limited scope. Their practice is generally limited to issues related to qualified retirement plans. Enrolled retirement plan agents. Their scope is also limited. Practice limited to employee plans in 5300, 5500 IRS forms. Okay, registered tax return preparers, possibly, with limited exceptions. and none of these individuals can be under suspension or under disbarment. Okay, tax practitioners. Let's go through the overview of the different points. Again, in Circular 230, in this table covers all the points we're going to go through. These are all the things you need to know about as a tax practitioner. This is the summary. We're going to go through the detail of each of these. So 1020, information to be furnished. 1021, knowledge of a client's omission. 1022, diligence as to accuracy. 1023, prompt disposition of pending matters. 1024, assistance from or to disbarred or suspended persons and former IRS employees. So again, these are all categories we're going to discuss. These are things you need to know about tax practitioners. These are the categories in Circular 230. 1025, practice by former government employees, their partners, and their associates. 1026, notaries. 1027, fees. 1028, return of client records. 1029, conflicts of interest. 1030, solicitation. So again, this is just the overview. I'm just going through these so you are familiar with the topics we're going to cover. You need to know something about each of these, and it's important that you know what the categories are. So this is the first step. 1031, negotiation of taxpayer checks. 1032, practice of law. 1033, best practices for tax advisors. 1034, standards with respect to tax returns and documents, affidavits, and other papers. 1035, competence. 1036, procedures to ensure compliance. 1037, requirements for written advice. 1038, establishment of advisory committees. 1050, penalties and sanctions. 1051, incompetence or misconduct. So that's the overview. All of these things, you need to know something about all of these. Okay, let's go through the details. Starting with furnishing information. Practitioner must promptly submit to the IRS any records or information that the agents or officers request, properly and lawfully, unless the practitioner believes in good faith and on reasonable grounds that the records or information are privileged. So basically, Section 1020 requires prompt cooperation with the IRS. That's pretty straightforward. Knowledge of client's omission. If a CPA's client has not complied with the laws or made an error or omission on a tax return, CPA practitioner must promptly notify the client of the error and the potential consequences. The CPA does not need to notify the IRS of the error and may not do so without the client's permission. This is a very important point. This is very frequently tested. If you know your client has not complied with laws or has made an error, you must notify the client and the potential consequences. You do not need to notify the IRS, and you cannot notify the IRS without the client's permission. This is similar to a lawyer who knows his client has done something, but he's still defending the client because that's our system. We want to give people the best possible defense or representation that they can get no matter what the circumstances. Okay, next one, due diligence. Practitioners must exercise due diligence in all aspects of their work. A practitioner can rely on the work product of others if reasonable care is used when engaging in supervising the others. So due diligence can extend to relying on the work of others if reasonable care is used when engaging in supervising those people. Prompt disposition. Practitioners may not unreasonably delay the prompt disposition of any matters. Okay, that's the end of this sample lesson for professional responsibilities. Great job studying the sample lesson. To get the full thing, go to cpaplanet.com. Study the full professional responsibilities lesson. Study all the reg lessons there. Get more points on your reg for the CPA exam and pass the CPA exam.